Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 14. I sat down on the ground shirtless as I stayed still and focused my breathing. Visible on my upper body and hidden within my pants, on my skin were a variety of intersecting lines of symbols that ran from my shoulders to my arms down to my torso, behind my back, and down to my legs. This was a full-body restriction seal. I had begun using this for my training due to the fact that the paper tag versions of this seal were not enough to increase my physical strength anymore. Using a shadow clone, I had made it inscribe this seal all over my body, but I added my own little twist to it. For one thing, unlike most seals that could be inscribed on a solid surface, I could make this seal visible and invisible according to my will, and it would show when I was activating it. This was also due to the fact that restriction seals were relatively simple seals compared to my natural energy seal and Minato's Thunder God technique formula, so they were easier to change and remove. The full-body restriction seal that I had created had many levels to it, each level causing my movements to be restricted by a factor of 2. For example, level 1 caused me to exert 2x more force to move my body, 21. Level 2 needed me to exert 4x more force to move my body, 22. Level 3 caused me to exert 8x more force to move my body, 23, and so on and so forth. Currently, I was using level 10 of the seal, which forcefully restricted my movements to 1/1024 of their normal amount and cost me 1024 CP per minute to maintain, but with my regeneration rate as high as it was, I could easily maintain this indefinitely. Thinking along those lines, I stood up before positioning my body in a handstand and doing handstand push-ups. Ever since I had completed my natural healing seal a few months ago, I had decided to dedicate my time to training up my body as much as possible. It was important that I grind my stats as often as I could, and while I could use clones to help practice my WIS and INT, and in some cases ENGY, they couldn't help me with my physical stats. For the most part, I spent my days training, going to the occasional mission, hanging out at Minato's place and hanging out with my teacher since she lived next door. Aside from that, I had been grinding up my elemental affinities with my clones on a daily basis, and as a matter of fact, I was almost done with them. 99, 100. I thought as I finished my last rep and pushed myself off the ground before flipping and sticking the landing. There was light perspiration on my face, but it was exactly the type of effect I had been hoping for in my training. With my movements forcefully restricted by 1024x, every movement was that much more taxing. I rotated my shoulders a little bit before looking ahead of me where there was a large cliff towering upwards. I jumped from my position and landed on the side of the cliff, using my chakra to keep me adheres to the surface. With my movements still restricted, I began to walk up the cliff with nothing but my legs. Not enough, I thought, increasing my resistance to 11. Immediately, my body halted its advance as I strained to move forward. My movements were now forcefully restricted to 1/2048x their usual amount, and my legs were feeling every moment of that in addition to the force of gravity. I pushed myself a little more and began to make a slow and arduous advance up the cliff. After what felt like hours, I finally made it to the top of the cliff and collapsed on the ground. Tired, I thought as I had been working out for the better part of this morning. Ping! Congratulations! Natural wind affinity has leveled up by 1. Congratulations! Natural wind affinity has reached level 100 max. Congratulations! Chakra control, CC, has increased to 98%. Congratulations! Natural fire affinity has leveled up by 1. Congratulations! Natural fire affinity has reached level 100 max. Congratulations! Chakra control, CC, has increased to 99%. Congratulations! Natural Earth Affinity has leveled up by 1. Congratulations! Natural Earth Affinity has reached level 100 max. Congratulations! Chakra control, CC, has increased to 100%. Finally done. I thought as I stood up, the exhaustion leaving me as the messages appeared and my clones dispelled. With this, I now had complete 100% control over my chakra, and I practiced this by raising my hand and willing a small ball of flame into existence. On my other hand, I formed a small sphere of wind and combined it with the fire, causing the flame to gain a bluish hue. I slightly smiled and dispelled the elements before thinking about what else I could do. If I wanted to, I could probably combine, and with my perfect control, I could probably find a way to create a faux elemental Kekii Genkai. A theory I had read on elemental Kekii Genkai stated that people born with these types of bloodlines were naturally able to mix their chakra natures in the perfect ratio of elements necessary to form a Kekii Genkai. For example, say Scorch Release required an exact 1.75 to 1 ratio of fire and wind elemental affinities. A person born with it would be able to naturally combine their chakra at that perfect ratio the entire way through, molding their chakra for the technique and executing it. If one wanted to recreate Scorch Release through their own abilities, then they would need perfect control over their chakra in addition to extremely high proficiency in fire and wind natures, and would need to be able to maintain that 1.75 to 1 ratio of fire to wind the entire way through executing the technique. I found that it was a very sound theory and I planned on testing it soon enough. However, for now, you can come out. I'm done training. Immediately, an Umbu member with a mouse mask appeared in front of me. Lord Hokage and Lord Danzo are requesting your presence. I nodded my head. Lead the way. Immediately he leaped from his position and made his way back towards the village. I followed his movements as we dashed towards the trees before we arrived in the busy streets of the village. He took me to the Hokage's residence through one of the many secret entrances around the village, and we walked down a corridor before eventually arriving in front of a door. They're waiting inside. I nodded my head, feeling 5 powerful chakra signatures and 1 weaker one that felt very familiar. Could that be? I approached and unlocked the door before entering inside and feeling 5 visions concentrated on my skin. Ha! I thought you called us here for something important, old man. What's a child doing here? Though he's quite adorable. A blonde woman with a sizable bust asked the Hokage as she looked at me, her arms crossed under her massive bust. Tsunade Senju. LVL 127. Rep. 0. The pale man with yellow slitted eyes next to her followed. I would like to know as well. I was forced to stop my experiments for this teacher. Orochimaru. LVL 147. Rep. 0. Finally, the man with long white hair in between the two looked at my bare face carefully with narrowed eyes. Wait, I've seen you before, haven't I? Jiraiya. LVL 139. Rep. 15. The Hokage took this moment to intervene. Yes, Jiraiya, he was the one you reported to me about almost a year ago on that mission to Tsuchigumo. Jiraiya bopped his palm with his fist. Ah, that's right. I remember that kid. Saying so, he looked me over once more before frowning. TCH, I can't believe he looks more handsome than me without his mask on. He suddenly appeared next to me and wrapped his arm around my shoulder before giving me a bright smile. Say, kid, why don't you be my wingman one of these days when I decide to go out? How about it? You interested? The Sannin asked with a wiggling of his brows. Before I could answer him, however, Hiruzen stepped in. Jiraiya, you can continue your antics at a later date, but for now I need you to focus. Why I called you here today is directly related to him. I could sense the interest rise in the eyes of the 3 Sannin before Tsunade scoffed. This kid? He can't be more than what, 7? 8 dash. I'm 8.5 actually. I was ignored. What exactly could he have done to warrant all of our attention? Are you sure you aren't just blowing things out of proportion? I looked at Hirozen and Danzo. You didn't tell them? No. No. Hirozen stated with a shake of his head. I figured that it would be best for them to see it firsthand than to explain it in words. Exactly what are we here to witness, Sarutobi-sensei? Orochimaru asked as he turned to his teacher. Just watch. Saying so, the Hokage made a hand see. I saw that around the bed of my would-be patient, seals glowed to life before vanishing. Silencing seals. I thought before focusing on the figure of the bed and blinking my eyes. It really is. 4 years ago. Hirozen began while looking at the man in the bed. This soldier lost his arm at the beginning of the war, and his stump has since then been sealed. I want you to watch carefully. Continue, Yoru. I nodded my head and approached the bed before placing my hands on the man's back. Shark, I said I would give you back your arm one day. I thought as I activated my mystical healing. My hands glowed a dark green, a sharp contrast to the bright green of the typical mystic palm technique, before Shark's arm began to regrow. The stump was forcefully torn open before new bone, muscle, nerves, and skin formed into a full adult hand. That's... Tsunade stated with wide eyes as she let her arms fall to the side. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes at me. Very fascinating indeed. You've got to be kidding me. Jiraiya stated out loud in wonder. Was that natural energy? Hirozen nodded. What are your thoughts on it, Jiraiya? The white-haired man put on a thoughtful look. I will have to ask the toads about this real quick. They'll be able to give more insight into this than me, so we will need another individual. That can be easily arranged. Danzo stated. As the grown-ups began to talk amongst themselves, I turned my gaze towards Shark. I didn't think you would actually be able to pull through, kid, 4 years. The man stated, yet didn't bother to turn around. You figured that out quickly. It makes me wonder if there was even a point to putting up silencing seals and giving you a blindfold. I replied. Shark chuckled, they didn't know that you had made that promise to me all those years ago. Saying so, he shook his head. I had been a bit skeptical when I had approached with the prospect of getting my arm back. I had thought, could it be that kid came through? But to actually get it back. He gripped his newly reformed limb. I can't thank you enough. I nodded my head. No worries. Samiki. Hiruzen stated, looking at Shark, you are free to go, but do not spread information about this technique, is that understood? Of course, Lord Hokage. The man said with a bow. The Hokage nodded before yelling. Mouse. The man instantly appeared in front of the Hokage. Escort him and obtain another individual with a lost limb. Make sure they can't see in this time, don't just bring someone blind. The Umbu shuffled awkwardly before bowing, of course, Lord Hokage. And with that, he vanished. Tell me, kid. Jiraiya began. How exactly did you pull that off? To absorb natural energy without turning into a sage or stone and to regrow limbs. He stroked his chin. You're pretty incredible for someone so young, almost reminds me of Minato. I turned my body and pulled up my sleeve, showcasing the design of my seal on my right shoulder. I created a seal to manage the absorption and output of natural energy to the traditional mystic palm technique in order to create a more powerful healing ability. Saying so, I looked towards Jiraiya. It was thanks to your research on natural energy and Minato's help that I was able to complete this. Oh? So, you're the kid he's been crying to me about. Jiraiya stated as he rubbed his chin and looked me up and down with a smile. You know, he's still upset that you mastered his technique in only a few minutes, but I have to say even I'm kind of jealous. He then turned to look at my tattoo appraisingly. How long did it take you to make it? Around 3 years. was my honest reply. Jiraiya blinked. Wow, and I thought Minato was a prodigy. Tell me, how does this seal work on a biological level? Orochimaru asked with a gleam in his eyes. I find it fascinating that you can regrow a complete appendage even from a closed wound. How exactly does that work? I put in a thoughtful expression. I had a relatively good amount of knowledge on biology, mainly on how chakra influenced it. That being said, if he was asking for a completely in-depth process about what the natural energy plus mystic healing combo was doing at a cellular level, I'm actually not sure. Orochimaru gave me a smile that made me marginally uncomfortable. Well then, if you come to my lab, I'm sure we will find out plenty. Jiraiya gave Orochimaru a weird look, creepy. A tick mark grew on the pale Sannin's head. I'm only curious as a scientist. What's truly creepy is your perverted antics and unhinged behavior. It's truly a wonder that you haven't created a village yet with your promiscuity. My antics are not merely perverted. Jiraiya said, his eyes closed as he blew smoke from his nose, they are super perverted. He struck a pose in triumph. How have you not been castrated by an enemy kunoichi by now? Jiraiya replied smugly, because after a night with me, why would any woman be my enemy? Orochimaru's face twitched. Please tell me you did not do that on purpose? What do you think? The white-haired man replied with wiggling brows. I am truly surprised that your face hasn't been buried in the wall by now. That got them to pause. Princess? Jiraiya stated as he looked at Tsunade. What's wrong? It was now that I realized that the blonde-haired woman had been oddly silent ever since I had demonstrated my technique. Tsunade looked at me, more specifically my shoulder, before biting her lower lip. If only at that time we had this, then maybe. She clenched her necklace tightly. And with that, the atmosphere became sullen. Isn't she a ray of sunshine? I thought before looking to my right as Mouse suddenly appeared inside the room with another limbless shinobi in hand. This one had no legs. Jiraiya. The Hokage stated. The man in question out in a serious expression on his face as he bit his thumb and drew blood before placing his palm on the ground. I could sense an immense amount of chakra being used for the technique as he yelled, Kuchiyos. In a puff of smoke, a small toad appeared. What's wrong, Jiraiya boy? Summoning me on such short notice? Ma is preparing lunch right now, and if I miss it, I won't hear the end of it. Please pay attention, Elder Fukasaku. I've got something interesting to show you. Jiraiya replied, nodding his head towards my direction. The toad in question gave me a speculative look. This boy? The toad then nodded and jumped up on Jiraiya's shoulder. All right then, let me see it. The Hokage nodded my way, so I once again placing my hands on the legless shinobi's back and activated my skill. In but a few moments, his legs began to regrow until they reached a maturation proportional to his age. Incredible. The toad stated, looking at my arms. Fusing natural energy to a technique the moment it is executed, and without fusing the natural energy into your chakra system. The frog nodded his head in thought. So what do you think? Jiraiya asked. Well, the toad began. It's a splendid technique, and seeing as he isn't directly absorbing the natural energy or directly transferring it to another individual, I'd say it's pretty safe and obviously more than effective. Jiraiya nodded. I see, thank you, Elder Fukasaku. Ah, no problem, Jiraiya boy. By the way. The toad began, looking towards my way. You've given me some things to think about, young one. I hope to see you again. I inclined my head in response. The toad then smiled. Well, I'm off. If I don't get back in time, Ma will throw a fit. And with that, he disappeared in a puff of smoke. Jiraiya smiled. Well, kid, it seems like your technique is well regarded even amongst the masters of sage energy. I suppose now we can dash. What are its restrictions? Tsunade asked seriously, cutting Jiraiya off. Any side effects? What about the conditions of the people you have treated? Have we checked up on them to see how they are coping with their new limb? Who can learn this technique? I blinked. The only restrictions are that only I can inscribe the seal for the technique, the user must be proficient in the mystic palm healing technique, and the user must have satisfactory chakra control. As for the people I've already healed, I looked towards the Hokage and Danzo. They are performing well. Danzo stated. The only issue is that the individuals who had lost their limbs longer ago tend to take longer to readjust to their new appendage. Aside from that, there has been no sign of rejection or terrible performance from their new limb. That's fine then, but make sure to keep an eye on them. Saying so, she looked towards Hirozen. I wish you would have told me what exactly had been so important as to need my presence. If so, I would have been here much sooner. Hirozen looked at her with a slight smile. Well, I'm glad you're here now instead of drinking your sorrows away. Tsunade paused and turned away, causing Hirozen to smile even more. I could sense the love and care he showed for not only Tsunade, but for his other two students as well. Isn't that adorable? And you? The blonde Sannin stated, looking at me. I blinked. Yes? She looked at my shoulder. Say you were to lose your arm where you implanted the seal, what would then happen? Well, I began. This seal is intimately connected to your own chakra network, so as long as you don't die, this seal will technically never fade even if the limb it is attached to is destroyed. As a matter of fact, I stated, pointing at my right shoulder where my seal was on. You could regrow that lost limb, and it should still have the seal on it. Tsunade nodded in understanding. And does it necessarily have to look like that? She asked, pointing at my Penrose triangle design. Not necessarily. I said, looking at my shoulder. I can adjust it to whatever design choice you want. Alrighty then. She stated, pointing at her forehead, more specifically the diamond pattern on her forehead. Can you superimpose it on this? I nodded my head and walked forward before placing my palm on her forehead. I used my chakra to form the necessary inscription for the technique, but condensed it to the shape of a diamond. With that complete, I let go of her forehead and noted that the blue diamond pattern on her forehead has turned green. I see. Orochimaru stated in interest. With the combination of this technique and your creation rebirth, you'll be practically immortal on the battlefield. Exactly. Tsunade stayed with a smile as she gripped her fists. I could sense an intense conviction from her, one that stated that she would never let something terrible happen again. But you know, Tsunade. Orochimaru began with a disconcerting smile. A child 24 years your junior created a more impressive medical technique than you could not in your 32 years of life? The joy on Tsunade's face vanished. Oh, that's bad. I thought and stealthily made my way next to Hirozen and Danzo. Oh, you bastard. Jiraiya stated towards Orochimaru. That's such a dirty blow. But is it not true? That may be so, but don't say it. Orochimaru slightly shrugged. I'm only saying that if she hadn't decided to waste more than half a decade of her miserable life in self-deprecation, maybe she would have accomplished M-. Immediately, Orochimaru leaned back, just in time to evade a devastating punch from Tsunade. The force of the attack generated wind pressure so strong that it blew a gigantic hole through the solid 12-foot reinforced steel walls of the room 10 feet away and continued onwards down the hall. Orochimaru chuckled and jumped backward, Tsunade glaring at him with a vein popping on her head. All right, enough. Hiruzen stated before the atmosphere turned any more hostile. And Yura, please come out from behind me. I did as instructed and acted as if nothing had ever happened. Yes, Lord Hokage? The older man sighed. In any case. He began while looking at Tsunade. I want you to screen medic Nin with enough skill to use this technique. I can't have one of my soldiers turning to stone on accident. Tsunade tilted her head. Turning to stone? So, I explained. Depending on the level of your chakra control, the regrown appendages might have some parts that have undergone petrification and turned to stone. The worse the user's chakra control, the more the parts of the regrown limb become petrified. Wait, then what about the people you healed before? Tsunade asked. My chakra control is perfect, was all I replied. Tsunade looked at me startled. Wait, what? We can have this discussion another time, Hirozen stated before looking my way. Before that, however, there is an important issue that needs to be considered. It's inevitable that we will be unable to hide this technique for long, and it will eventually be known to the other nations. If the enemy tries to get a hold of someone who knows it, the rest didn't need to be said. If the enemy was able to kidnap a medic Nin who had my seal, then if they weren't being tortured to death, they would be used against us. I thought for a moment before I replied. I can make adjustments to the seal and put a kill switch that can be activated by chakra. That was the best method I could think of. If the enemy wanted to use our medic Nin who had my seal, then they would have to allow them to use their chakra. That would give them the opportunity to off themselves, if necessary, which was way better than being tortured or raped. At least you would go out on your own terms. Even if they wanted to study my seal, without insight into natural energy, and a high degree of Fuin Jutsu affinity, it was pretty much pointless. The Hokage nodded slightly, likely thinking along the same lines as he replied, that will most likely be for the best. With that aside, I'll have you give the seal to anyone Tsunade deems appropriate. Anyone have anything else to say? Your seal. Jiraiya began. Can it be taught to others? It's a pretty fascinating piece of work, and I would love to take a look at it. As long as they are highly skilled in Fuin Jutsu, then they should be able to, though it will require knowledge in other areas, most notably human biology. I supplied. Jiraiya grinned. I'll take you up on that then. I inclined my head before turning towards Danzo. I looked at his bandaged arm, which was hidden within his black robe, and at the right side of his face, which was bandaged as well. Lord Danzo, if you like, I could heal you of your debilitating injuries. Danzo looked at us for a moment and remained silent as he began to unwrap the bandages covering the right side of his body. The bandages unfurled and fell to the ground, revealing what was hidden beneath. Silence. Jiraiya gaped. Orochimaru looked amused. Tsunade frowned in mild annoyance. Hiruzen simply looked on with a knowing smile. There's nothing, I stated as I gazed at the plain, bare, completely healthy, and undamaged skin covering Danzo's body. Misdirection. Danzo explained simply, a very mild, nearly unnoticeable, tinge of amusement in his tone. Always look underneath the underneath, he said while rewrapping himself. I was slightly speechless. Imagine if an enemy tried to attack Danzo thinking he was a fragile disabled man, only to get blindsided when Danzo suddenly slit his throat with his disabled hand. I then looked to his bandage's right eye. Then, I'm not getting any younger, Danzo began. The amount of times I'll ever be called into action will be few and far in between, while you all will soon take over for the older generation. There's no need to worry about an inconvenience as minor as this. Hiruzen looked at his friend and gave a slight smirk before looking at all of us. If that is all, then you are all dismissed. Mouse. Yes, Lord Hokage, the man said, dropping down from the ceiling. Hiruzen looked towards the ninja I had healed. Take him away. Yes, the man said, and vanished with the individual. As for the rest of you, he stated, looking at his students, Yoro's identity should not be compromised, is that understood? Yes, they yelled in unison. Good. he said before turning around and looking at the hole in the wall. Danzo, please get someone to fix that. At the man's nod, Hiruzen looked back at me. You've done more for this village than I could have ever expected from a child your age. For that, you have my gratitude. I bowed, thank you Lord Hokage. Hiruzen nodded before glancing at the hole in the wall once more, shaking his head and vanishing. Danzo looked at me deeply before giving us a nod and vanishing as well. Child. Orochimaru stayed as he looked my way. I'm quite interested in that technique of yours. You wouldn't mind allowing me to possess one of your magnificent inscriptions, would you? You dirty snake. Tsunade snarled with her arms on her waist. If you weren't paying attention, I am in charge of screening the medical ninja deserving of that ability, and I say no. But it's not really yours to give now, is it, princess? Orochimaru asked, a smile on his face. Besides, my control, while not as perfect as yours, is quite excellent, and I can use it in a lot of my experiments. Here, his grin grew savage. Some of them tend to have a short shelf life, so to speak. Humph. The blonde woman began, crossing her arms under her massive bust. I said no. Well, that's not your decision, is it? Saying so, Orochimaru looked at me with that same smile. You better not give him a thing. Tsunade stated, her eyes seemingly boring holes through mine. I looked towards Jiraiya, who sighed. Princess, come on, don't be petty. The snake bastard maybe be the most unpleasant, repulsive, obnoxious dash. Orochimaru, I still exist. Piece of work, but he has a point. Let the kid do whatever. I kind of want it as well. Tsunade bit her lip while angrily tapping her finger against her arm before she acquiesced. TCH, fine, do whatever you want. I raised a brow at that before looking towards Orochimaru. I don't particularly care, however. In return I want two things from you. The pale-skinned man gave me that patented wide grin, as long as it is within my abilities. I nodded and took a kunai before slitting my wrist. From my inventory, I took out a small cup and collected the blood before my healing factor sealed the wound shut. Fascinating. Orochimaru stated as he looked at my wrist. Such powerful regenerative capacity. Yeah, and I need you to do a test on whatever is in my blood and compile data on it. I stated. With an eager look, Orochimaru took the cup. And your other request? I'll let you know when the time comes. That works splendidly. The slitted-eyed man replied. If you are ever interested in helping me with my research, do let me know. While he mildly disturbed me, I nodded nonetheless. I'll keep that in mind. Saying so, I walked up to him and gripped his wrist before implanting my seal on it in the shape of a simple circle. Orochimaru looked at it in wonder before glancing back at me with an unsettling smile. Orochimaru vanished. To be honest, I think he would have done you a favor just for your blood. Jiraiya commented with a smile before his eyes widened, and he whipped his head towards Tsunade. Princess? I blinked at his sudden response and turned towards her as well, noting that her body was shaking as she stared at the floor. At my blood. I am okay. She stated before taking a step back and shaking her head. In any case, good riddance. Tsunade said as she looked in the direction that Orochimaru left before looking my way. She seemed to struggle to say something before sending a nod of acknowledgement my way. I doubted you earlier, kid, so I apologize and thank you. Before even waiting for my reply, she too vanished. I looked at the place she disappeared from with mild confusion. Was she afraid of my blood? As a medic, Nin? The white-haired Sannin scratched his head with a sigh before shaking it. She's been through some rough shit over the years. Saying so, he shook his head once more before asking, anyway, about your technique. I took out the scrolls I had written my notes on from my inventory and handed it over to him. That's the process I went through to create it. It'll help if you have good knowledge of chakra theory, the human body, and the traditional mystic palm technique. Jiraiya smiled as he took them. "No worries, kid, I'm the great Jiraiya-sama. Something like this won't take me too long to figure out." Immediately, he continued, "Well, I got to go do my own thing," Jiraiya stated before looking my way and smiling. "Later, kiddo." And he vanished as well, leaving me here in this bunker alone with a hole in the wall. I approached the gates to the Uchiha clan at the edge of the village and walked up to the two front guards who were keeping watch. They suddenly became alert at the sound of my footsteps before relaxing slightly as they saw me approach. "Halt, kid. State your purpose for being here." One of the shinobi on watch stayed. The other guard looked at me carefully before smiling slightly and patting his colleague on the shoulder. "Relax, Genta, this is the kid I talked to you about before, Itachi, young master's friend." "Eh? Seriously?" Genta replied, looking me up and down curiously. "You're telling me he's the one that could keep up with Itachi despite them being of similar age?" "That's right," the other guard said with a smile before looking at me and waving my way. "Yo Yoro, what brings you here at this time?" "Haruki," I stated, looking at the guard. "Nothing really, I'm simply here because I have nothing else to do." "I'm so envious," the man said with a sigh. "I feel like every day I'm wasting away being here. Even my last partner got to do something else." "I see," I replied before asking, "Can I come in?" "Ah, that's right," Haruki responded before stepping aside and opening the gate. "Please come in." I nodded to the two guards and entered the Uchiha residential area, before making my way towards Itachi's place. I received some nods here and there from the few people that recognized me since I had been here a few times in the past. In but a few moments, I arrived at the Uchiha clan head's residence, and admired its large size for a moment before knocking on the door. "Coming," a voice yelled from inside before the door was opened, giving view to a beautiful black-haired woman with onyx eyes. "Ah. Yoru? I didn't know you would be here today. She's so pretty." I nodded my head. "I apologize for my intrusion, Mrs. Uchiha." No, don't worry about it," she said with a smile before ushering me inside. "Why don't you come in?" So, I nodded my head and followed her inside before asking, "Is Itachi home?" She put on a thoughtful expression. "Last I remember he said he was going out back to train dash." Before she could finish that sentence, the sound of a baby's cries echoed out through the building. "Oh," Mikoto stated, looking towards the living room. "It seems like Sasuke's woken up." She then turned back towards me and gave me an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry I can't entertain you any longer, but feel free to look out back." "Thank you." She nodded with a smile before heading towards the sounds of Sasuke's cries. "Don't cry. Mommy's coming." I watched as she disappeared before heading towards the back door of the home. I exited it and admired the largely forested scenery before closing my eyes and focusing my enhanced senses outwards. I listened for the sound of kunai impacting wood before making my way towards that direction. As I came closer towards my destination, I could hear the sound of Itachi's exertion and eventually saw his figure in front of me. His body was covered in sweat, yet his gaze remained unwatered as he gripped his kunai before jumping up and tossing them together. At the midpoint of their flight, the projectiles collided against each and ricocheted directly into the bullseye of two opposite targets. Itachi landed on the ground and paused for a moment before throwing a kunai at my direction. I caught it between my fingers and walked out of the tree lines into the clearing. That wasn't nice. Itachi blinked. "Yoru." "Yo." I replied before twirling the weapon between my fingers before tossing the kunai up into the air. Itachi smiled and tossed his kunai towards mine at a precise angle where they ricocheted and became lodged into the centers of two other targets opposite each other. "What are you doing here at this time?" Itachi asked as he sat on the ground. "Isn't it quite early for you?" I finished my training early, I stated as I sat down next to him. Plus, I just got out of something important, so I'm not really in the mood to go do anything else. I see. Itachi stated before looking up in the sky. We stayed in silence for a while as we typically did when we hung out. We sometimes trained together, but due to my missions as an UMBU member, there wasn't much opportunity for me to relax, so typically I did that when I came here. Besides, this place had a decent view of the clouds. After a while, Itachi, still looking up at the clouds, asked, "Hey Yoro?" I replied, laying on the ground, my gaze focused above. He looked at me. He paused and thought for a moment before continuing. "Do you believe that world peace is attainable?" Attainable, I stated before my eyes became half-lidded. With the current state of this screwed-up place, I can't say that I have much faith in humanity to accomplish that. Is that so? Itachi stated, looking back up to the clouds. So many people die each day from the war, and I've already been sent out to the front lines. He gripped his fists. I don't want my brother to grow up in this kind of world or to stain his hands as a child. He shouldn't have to do that. He paused and looked down towards his hands. No one should. I stated, looking at Itachi before looking back up towards the clouds. If you're so passionate, then do something about it. Itachi widened his eyes and turned his head towards me. Me? Something like world peace isn't going to happen on its own. I replied. If you want to chase after something like that, then you'll have to take an active role. Itachi began, looking down towards his hands. I'm not sure if I can do that. Obviously you of now is too weak to cause any impactful change, we all are. I replied. Maybe if you become as strong as Konoha's founders, you would be able to directly impact the world. As strong as Hashirama and Madara. He stated, looking towards me with a sigh. That's going to be difficult. Yep. I replied. But if you really aspire for such an ideal world, you will need to be at least powerful enough to take on the entire shinobi world on your own. He widened his eyes before returning his features to before and looking up. Why should it take that much for the world to change for the better? Because, I began, with slightly lidded eyes. Humans always find a reason to start a conflict. From love to hatred to wealth to women, to even because someone looked at you funny, humans will always find reasons to fight. It's in our nature to fight, so for you to want to stop them from doing that. Itachi laid back in the grass. Why would it be in our nature? Who knows? A flaw in humanity's design? I replied. In any case, if you want to go against human nature, you'll need to be ready to fight everyone. Itachi stayed silent for a moment before asking. And what about you? What do you aspire for? What I want, I began, is selfish and simple, but something I have always strived for. At Itachi's curious look, I finished. Strength. I clenched my fist in front of my face. I want to be so strong that the very idea of challenging me would be utter foolishness, that even thinking about going up against me would be a sin. Why? I put down my hand and closed my eyes. So that I can live a life with absolutely nothing to control me. The only thing I value above my own life is my own peace. Itachi looked at me with a smile. That is selfish. He then stayed silent for a moment before asking. And then? After you become the strongest? I opened my eyes halfway. Who knows? I'll probably travel the world or find something else to strive for. I really don't have that much desire anyway. I then paused before looking at Itachi. And maybe if by that time you still haven't achieved your dream, I will lend a hand. Really? Really? Itachi asked with wide eyes. Why not? I replied, looking back up towards the clouds. I'll probably have nothing better to do anyway. Itachi stayed silent for a moment. Thank you. HN. And so, we stayed there on the grass looking up towards the clouds, and so in my lackadaisical state of mind, I observed them. Observe. Cloud, cumulus. Cumulus clouds are clouds which have flat bases, and are often described as puffy, cotton-like or fluffy in appearance. Their name derives from the Latin cumulo dash, meaning heap or pile. Good to know. And so I observed them again. Cloud, cumulus. Cumulus clouds are clouds which have flat bases, and are often described as puffy, cotton-like or fluffy in appearance. Their name derives from the Latin cumulo dash, meaning heap or pile. And again. Cloud, cumulus. Cumulus clouds are clouds which have flat bases, and are often described as puffy, cotton-like or fluffy in appearance. And again. Cloud, cumulus. Cumulus clouds are clouds. And again. Cloud, cumulus. I had no idea how mind-numbingly long I decided to stare up at the clouds. Cloud. But eventually. Oh, that's new. Cloud, cirrus. Cirrus is a genus of atmospheric cloud generally characterized by thin, wispy strands, giving the type its name from the Latin word cirrus, meaning a ringlet or curling lock of hair. Neat. Ping. Congratulations. Observe has leveled up to level 100. Congratulations. Observe has evolved into the skill, deconstructive analysis. Deconstructive analysis, active, LVL1, 0.00%. Deconstructive analysis is a skill that not only allows you to observe objects, situations, and people in order to gather information, it also allows you to visually deconstruct your opponent. This allows you to observe their state of mind and weak points. The higher the skill, the weaker points you can unearth. Information of individuals 100 LVLS higher than you is now available. Can observe 1% of the enemy's weak points. Note, successfully targeting those weak points allows you to deal critical damage. That's even neater. Itachi. A voice yelled out from the distance, causing me to blink. I've never heard that voice before. Yet, it seemed as Itachi was intimately familiar with it as he stood up from his sitting position and looked towards the direction of the voice. Who is that? I asked. It's another close friend of mine. Itachi stated before looking my way and freezing. I raised a brow. What? He looked me straight in the eyes. Yoru, your eyes. I blinked. What's wrong? They're glowing. I paused at that. Could it be? Immediately I deactivated deconstructive analysis and looked at Itachi. How about now? He shook his head. No, not anymore. What was dash? Itachi. I found you. A feminine voice shouted out before a figure came into view. She had long brown hair and a ponytail with bangs framing her face and onyx eyes, with a small adorable mole under her right eye. She's cute. I thought before looking back up at the clouds. But that bunny cloud though. Izumi. Itachi stated as he looked at the girl. What are you doing here? The girl smiled. You promised we would go around the village today. Itachi paused. Oh. Izumi sighed. You know Itachi, I figured you would get so lost in your training that you would forget dash. She paused and blinked. Who was that? Itachi asked before looking at me who was still admiring the clouds. Ah, this is Yoru, a friend of mine. I'm surprised, she stated, blinking. I wouldn't think you would have any friends besides me. Good for you, Itachi. That's rude. She giggled before looking my way and giving me a short bow. Nice to meet you. I'm Izumi Uchiha and one of Itachi's friends. Let's get along. She finished with a beautiful smile. Likewise. I said as I looked her way before turning my gaze back towards Itachi with a smile. I didn't think you had it in you to get such an adorable girlfriend, and at such a young age too. Good for you. Itachi looked at me startled. Well, she's not my girlfriend. Izumi replied, placing her hands on her flushed cheeks. Itachi looked at her before looking back at me with a sigh. Why do you do this? Trust me, I said, standing up and dusting myself off. You'll definitely thank me one day. Itachi blinked. Where are you going? Well, I said, looking at Izumi who was still in her own world before looking back at Itachi. It was nice hanging out, but you made a promise to a woman so you have to honor that besides. I said, looking towards the distance. I've spent some time here and still have another trip to make. I see. Itachi stated before he blinked as I lent him a hand and pulled him up. Thank you. No worries. I said before looking towards a certain direction of the Uchiha clan district. Well, I'll be off. Itachi nodded and turned towards Izumi, so I body flickered to my next destination. I stood in front of the door of a relatively small apartment that was part of an apartment complex near the edge of the Uchiha clan residential area. I looked at the house for a moment before raising my hand and knocking on the door a few times and waiting. I'm coming. Immediately the door opened, giving view to a boy with black eyes, short black hair, and a pair of orange goggles resting on his forehead. Yo, Obito. Obito blinked and looked at me for a moment. Yoru? I didn't expect to see you. What are you doing here? I was in the area so I thought I would drop by. I said, tilting my head to get a view of his home. You mind if I come inside? He shook his head with a smile. Of course not, come and dash. Ah, little Yoru. What a surprise to see you here. An elderly voice stated behind Obito, causing us to look at the source. Grandma. Obito stated as he turned around. I looked at the old woman for a moment before bowing slightly. Madam Uchiha, I apologize for my intrusion. I came here on such short notice. It's fine. It's fine. The woman said, waving me off with a smile. Why don't you come inside and I'll get you something to eat? I nodded my head and looked towards Obito, who ushered me inside. Why don't you two make yourselves comfortable while I go prepare something? The elder woman said kindly. Thank you. I apologize for the trouble. The woman just smiled in return and made her way to the kitchen, leaving me alone with Obito, who returned his gaze back towards me. I realize I haven't been seeing you as of late. How's it been? Fine, but busy. I replied while making myself comfortable on the couch. I've been working with a few different Fuinjutsu projects, in addition to constantly doing missions. I haven't had that much time to relax. Is that so? Obito asked before scratching the back of his head and smiling. I still can't believe you can understand that stuff. He then began to slightly grumble. Every time I look at a seal I just get dizzy. I replied, looking towards him. Well, it's not really for everyone, and while it is wonderful, it takes a lot of dedication. You'd be spending much less time training your skills if you picked up Fuinjutsu. Even you have your own troubles, huh? Obito stated before smiling as 2 plates of spring rolls were placed on the table. Ah. Thank you, Grandma. Of course. The elder woman said with a smile. I hope you both enjoy. I nodded in reply. Thank you. She gave me one more smile before looking at Obito. I'll be going out to get some things, so be on your best behavior while I'm gone. Of course. Obito replied with a huff. What exactly do you take me for? The elder woman chuckled before leaving the apartment. As soon as his grandmother left the house, Obito grinned as he looked at the food on the table before clapping his hands. Let's eat. And with that, he devoured his food. I watched him gorge on the spring rolls before I liberally took one and popped it in my mouth. What are you up to these days? Obito looked at me and swallowed his food before replying. Training, missions, you know, he said, grabbing another spring roll. The usual. Then he ate it. I stated as I grabbed another spring roll. Then, how is your love life with Rin going? Obito immediately spat out his spring roll and began to cough while patting his chest. He eventually looked at me with a frustrated but flushed gaze before sighing. It's gone nowhere, he stated while facing the ceiling. She's so hung up on Kakashi. He shifted once more. I don't think I have a shot at this rate. Trust me, I've been trying for years to no avail. I thought while swallowing the spring roll. I guess I can impart into you some of my knowledge about her emotions. Obito looked at me startled. You? He then looked at my face before giving me a twitching smile. I don't think someone with the emotional capacity of a brick can really teach me much. I raised a brow before shrugging and turning away. Fine, you can deal with your love life on your own. We all know how well that is going. And not a moment later. Please teach me your ways, Yura-senpai. Obito stated as he kneeled on the ground and looked up at me with teary eyes. I rolled my eyes. Fine, but first, stop making a fool of yourself. Yes, he stated as he stood up immediately in salute. I looked him over before ushering him to sit down, to which he complied. Now, I began while looking at Obito. Do you know why Rin is so fixated on Kakashi? Obito furrowed his brows before pouting. Because that silver-haired, selfish, emotionless dash. I gave him a look. He twitched his eyes before chuckling nervously. I meant Kakashi. He then went back to pouting. Because Kakashi is such a great ninja, and I guess she likes him for dash. Wrong. I started cutting him off. At his surprised look, I continued. Rin doesn't actually like Kakashi as much as you think she does. He blinked, but then exclaimed, but every time she looks at him there's stars in her eyes and she always scolds me for causing trouble dash. I get the feeling that you deserve those. Obito paused and rapidly shook his head before looking my way. Anyway dash, he began while taking a breath. She always focuses her attention towards him and always praises him. He then slumped to the couch. I'm pretty sure she likes him a lot. I sighed. No, I said, looking straight at him. She merely has great admiration towards Kakashi, but not actual love. At his startled look, I elaborated. Every time she praises Kakashi, it is because of his skill, and every time she scolds you, it is because of your lack thereof. Am I right? He slightly looked away. Well, you're not wrong. I continued. I've been around Team Minato, and I have noticed that she doesn't show any form of romantic gestures towards Kakashi. That was a lie, she definitely had a crush on him. She simply admired him as a shinobi, comrade, and friend. Nothing more. Everything more. Obito's eyes widened. Then what about me? I looked at him carefully. Of course, she cares about you as well. Just as, if not more so, than she does Kakashi. Then why dash? She treats you like that because she cares, you fool. I stated before gulping down another spring roll. Despite your incompetence, Rin actually has a unique place for you in her heart. I could sense his emotions spinning before he asked. Then why dash? Because of your immaturity, I suppose. I replied, already figuring the question. Both Kakashi and Rin act in a much more reserved manner befitting their status as shinobi, but your boisterousness makes you seem like a child. That's probably why she doesn't show much romantic interest in you. Because of your low maturity. I see. He said, slumping further into the couch while sighing. If I was like you and Kakashi. Wrong. I stated, breaking him from his thought process. At his gaze, I continued. Don't try to change who you are or it'll come off as forced or fake. But didn't you say dash? I know what I said. I replied before sitting up straight and looking at him. But changing who you are isn't the answer. Improving yourself is. Improving myself. Obito replied in thought. Exactly. I said. Become the best version of yourself as possible, not just in your personality, but also in your skills. As long as you don't do anything stupid, I'm sure you can wiggle your way into her heart. There was a short silence before Obito looked at me oddly. You know, for someone with the emotional capacity of a toaster, you actually give decent advice. It was really all thanks to empathy, or I'd have terrible people skills. Well, you can choose not to listen to my advice if you feel that way. He hastily shook his hands. No. I'll gladly take your advice, master. I took another spring roll and popped it in my mouth before engaging in conversation with Obito about other meaningless trifles. Where to next? I appeared in front of the Namikaze Uzumaki house and placed my hand the side of the door before gaining access to the house. As the door clicked open and I stepped into the house. Yoru! A voice yelled as I saw the short red-haired creature run towards me. However, before she could collide with me, I picked her up by the scruff of her shirt and lifted her up to eye level. Didn't your mom tell you not to run around like that? She giggled. I placed her on my shoulder before looking around. Your parents? She hummed for a moment while playing with my hair. Mama is out and Papa is dash. Here. Minato stated as he came down the stairs from his room and smiled. Ah, Papa. Mito stated as she reached out her hands towards him. Minato smiled and liberated her from my shoulders before looking at me. What brings you here at this time? Not that you aren't welcome, of course. Nothing really. I just finished a meeting with the Hokage and the Sannin a few hours back. Minato began to walk to the living room as he replied. Ah, your healing skill, right? I nodded my head. And how did that go? He asked as he sat down on the couch. I don't think they expected my show. I replied with a slight smile. In the end, Lady Tsunade will screen shinobi who have good enough chakra control and are familiar with the mystic palm technique. I'll implant my seal on their bodies, allowing them to regrow limbs as well. Look at you go. Minato stated with a smile. Now that you're done with your pet project, what's next? I shrugged. Who knows? I wanted to work on some spacetime projects, but Kushina forbade me from even touching them. I then planned on working on gravity-based seals, but your wife was afraid I would create a wormhole to another dimension or something, so those projects were shelved since she wouldn't teach me. Minato shuffled uncomfortably. Yeah, it must be rough. I looked at him in suspicion before deciding not to bother. The only good thing is that I completed my kinetic absorption seal, so at least I have something new in my arsenal. Oh? I think Kushina told me about that one. Minato stated in thought. She kept explaining how it was such a novel concept to apply to the general immobilization seal. Good on you. I suppose. I replied. But regardless, now that I have nothing new to work on, I'll just dedicate all my focus on training. Minato looked at me in amusement. Many shinobi more than twice your age are only around your level of strength, yet you still want to push forward. Compared to you. I said, looking at him carefully. Name, Minato Namikaze. Race, human. Level, LVL 165. HP, 825000/825000. CP, 742500/742500. STR, 2250. VIT, 2500. Dex, 4500. Int, 3000. Wis, 2500. NG, 2250. I still have a long way to go. I finished as I observed his stats. It was now that I was looking at another person with the deconstructive analysis that I noted very small glowing red areas on his body. They glittered like small stars and seemed to be focused around areas that were near normal human weak points were. Those must be his weak points, I suppose. Minato blinked as he looked at me carefully. Yoru, your eyes are glowing. I shut off my new skill. Yeah, they do that now. I see. Minato said. He seemed to want to say more but decided not to bother. What about you? I asked. Now that you've completed your big projects, do you have anything new planned? In the meantime, not so much. Minato replied. I've had to go on more missions frequently due to the war nearing its climax. It's just. I tilted my head. It's just. Minato looked at me. Canopy Bridge, you know it? I thought. Yeah, from what I recall, it's an important supply checkpoint for IWA in their advance into Kusagakure. That's right. Minato replied before sighing. Over the last few months, with the war intensifying, IWA has been able to ever so slowly advance due to their occupation of Canopy Bridge. I looked at Minato carefully, and in a few months, my team might have to go there. He paused and explained. While the war isn't necessarily against our favor, the longer we allow IWA to occupy the bridge, the worse it'll be for us. I plan on taking care of the situation, however, not before I train my team a little more. I see. I said, looking towards him. You really don't have the time to focus on anything else right now, do you? The blonde sighed and leaned into the couch. Not too much, unfortunately, but hopefully after this war ends, I'll have some more time to work on something new. I raised a brow. Kushina will probably be annoyed with you again, you know. Minato chuckled nervously. What can I say? Seals are just that fun. I can't really argue. I replied. With that, we continued our small talk ranging from his projects to cool jutsu and just about any other mundane thing. That was until Minato looked down towards his lap to see his daughter peacefully sleeping. I guess she was really tired. He said, carefully picking her up and putting her over his shoulder. I nodded my head before standing up. You're leaving already? Minato asked. Yeah. I replied while loosening my neck with cracks. I'll probably go harass my teacher or something. I have nothing better to do for the night. All right then. Minato replied brightly. It was a pleasure to talk with you. Likewise. I said before vanishing from the house. Chapter 15. Fire Style, Fireball Jutsu. And with that declaration, a ball of fire flew towards Minato, who handily dodged the attack. Unfortunately, I was sitting on a tree 20 meters behind with a book in hand, so the attack came rushing towards me. Ah! Yura, watch out! Obito yelled, though it was unnecessary. With a raised hand, I spread my chakra out and gathered water molecules from the atmosphere before forming a thick wall of water to my side. The fireball impacted the aqueous barrier, causing steam to emit from the evaporating liquid. I channeled my chakra through my lungs and converted the energy into its wind nature before blowing the air out of my lips. The wind generated was much more intense than it should have been from my simple action, and it caused the steam to disperse. Minato landed on the ground and looked to me with a smile before turning back towards Obito, who was standing on a tree besides Rin. In the field, you have to be mindful of the impact your attacks have on your allies. Always make sure to keep an eye out in order to prevent friendly fire. Yes, sensei. Obito stated sharply, but no sooner did Rin make a quick swiping motion with a kunai in hand. The effect of that movement was soon noticeable as a large net was made visible under Minato's feet, threatening to ensnare him. Unfortunately for the two, the blonde ninja had unnatural reaction abilities and was able to quickly jump up into the air. Darn, so close. Obito stated, however. Rin merely smiled. Not yet, she said eagerly, and set off another trap which caused a log to fly towards Minato's form at breakneck speeds. The man reacted quickly and threw one of his tri-pronged kunai at a tree beside him, and no sooner did he teleport to that location, dodging the attack. Rin sighed, though there was still a smile on her face. I thought we might have had you for a moment, sensei. Minato chuckled. Not bad, you two. I like to see that you're working together and building off each other. This is exactly what you're going to need. Minato immediately jumped out of the way as a barrage of kunai struck the ground where he had previously been. Immediately, Kakashi appeared from the bushes and dashed towards Minato with two kunai in hand. He quickly threw them consecutively at his teacher. However, Minato easily avoided them by tilting his head left then right. The kunai flew past him on either side of his face, before being lodged into the tree behind the blonde shinobi. Kakashi didn't let up, however, and quickly flipped through two hand seals before the sound of birds chirping could be heard. The electricity generated on his hands actually made a sharp beeline towards Minato in the same trajectory that he had thrown his kunai. Oh! Ninja wire on the kunai. I thought as I watched Kakashi cross his arms together, causing the electrified strings to begin to come together, like the blades of scissors. Minato, in order to prevent getting beheaded by his student, immediately ducked, his chest nearly touching the ground. Kakashi took this moment to flip through hand seals once more before slamming his palm on the ground, causing a ripple to expand towards Minato. The unsteady earth caused Minato to falter for a fraction of a second, which was all the opportunity Kakashi needed to dash towards him and reach out his hand towards the bells on Minato's side. I sensed Minato's appreciation before he twisted his body and, using one hand for support, slapped Kakashi's hand away before flipping back. Kakashi took this moment to retreat back into the bushes before Minato could regain his bearings. TCH. Show off. Obito stated as he sat down on the tree branch with his arms crossed. Rin gave him a smile. We did well, Obito, let's just see what Kakashi has planned. Saying so, I noticed Rin inch slightly closer to Obito, and I felt her mood fluctuate positively. Oh? Not bad, Obito. Though, with his crush so close to him, and with his blushing cheeks, Obito relented with a nod. The forest was silent for but a moment before the trees rustled. Immediately, three Kakashis came out from the bushes towards Minato in three directions. The blonde took a single step back before flipping a Kakashi over his shoulder, causing it to impact another one. They both dispelled, causing a momentary smokescreen before the third Kakashi clone seemingly disappeared. Minato raised his brow at the sight, and no sooner did a pair of small hands grab his feet from underground. I watched the display before my ears twitched. With my enhanced hearing, I could hear the sound of a Kakashi's bird-sounding lightning technique chirping in the distance. It was at that moment that Minato's chakra signature disappeared from in front of me and appeared next to Kakashi's chakra signature. He used the Flying Thunder God technique, but when did he? I paused and reviewed the battle for a moment before recalling the moment that Minato had slapped Kakashi's hand away. He must have implanted the formula onto Kakashi's sleeve then. As my musings ended, Minato appeared back in the clearing with a slightly downtrodden Kakashi in tow. Seeing his student's appearance, Minato patted his head. You did good, Kakashi. Your skills, strength, and tactics are one befitting of a jonin, so don't take your loss to heart. Kakashi nodded before Obito and Rin dropped down next to them. You were close, Kakashi. Rin stated with a smile. Next time, you'll definitely get him. She finished in assurance. Humph. Obito stated with his hands on his head. Once I get my Sharingan, I'll do 10x better than him. Rin gave him a bright smile. I believe in you. Obito's cheeks reddened a substantial amount before he quickly turned his gaze away. I watched them for a moment before a gargantuan chakra signature appeared on the edge of my detection range and arrived in front of Minato and his team in but a few moments. If it wasn't for the fact that I felt this same signature pretty much every single day, and was familiar with who had it, I would have just run in the opposite direction. Everyone, food is here. Kushina yelled with a smile as she appeared in the clearing with an adorable red-haired girl in her hands. She placed Mito down and began channeling chakra to a specific point on her body, before in a puff, the ground became covered with neatly decorated and assorted foodstuffs. Ah! Rin stated, stars in her eyes as she looked at the food and grabbed one of the baskets. Your cooking is always the best, Mrs. Uzumaki. I love it. Kushina's eyes widened before she grabbed Rin in a hug and began rubbing her cheek against hers. Oh. You're just the most adorable creature. Ah. She eventually let the flustered Rin go before looking at the three other guys in front of her with a smile. I prepared this for all of us, so please enjoy. Minato smiled in response while Kakashi nodded his head slightly, but Obito. Who needs to eat? He began before looking at Kakashi angrily. I won't take a single bite until I beat him. Sensei. One more time, please. Ha! Kushina stated as a tick mark grew on her forehead while she looked at Obito. Her hair began to sway wildly in 9 directions as she began pulling on Obito's cheeks and replied. Listen here, you ungrateful brat. The food I so graciously prepared for you is going to end up in your stomach even if I have to force it down there. Understand? Yes, ich understand. Obito stated as he tried to pull away from her hands that were pinching his face, but to no avail. Good. She replied before letting go of Obito's face and looking my way in the distance. Yoru, you too. Yes, ma'am. I said and appeared next to them. Now. Kushina stated with a smile. Let's eat. Thank you for the meal. Thanks for the food. Even though I was forced to eat this, thank you. Rin, Kakashi, and Obito stated respectively. Kushina rolled her eyes at Obito's comment before smiling. Of course. You all need to be on your best for tomorrow. Kushina's right. Minato began as he looked towards his team. After this, go rest up and don't do anything strenuous tonight. We're going to have a long day tomorrow. Obito blinked. Our mission to Canopy Bridge? That's right. Minato began before looking at Kakashi, and for that mission, Kakashi will be your team captain since he just got promoted to Jonin. Good for you, Kakashi. Rin stated with a smile. I could do much better, eventually. Obito stated with his arms crossed as he looked away. Minato simply smiled. Kakashi was the first to leave after putting his stuff away, followed by Rin and Obito. Thank you for the meal. I said as I finished my food and placed it down on the picnic cloth. Of course, Yoru. Kushina said brightly. I nodded and stood up, prompting Kushina to ask. You're all set? I nodded my head. I'll be here for a while longer so you don't have to wait for me. Kushina nodded before looking at Minato. I'm sure you're going to have a long day ahead of you tomorrow. You should go home and rest. Yeah, you're right. Minato replied while picking up Mito. He then looked towards me with a smile. Stay safe, Yoru. I nodded in reply, likewise. And with that, the couple began their trek back to their home. I watched them leave, thinking about the mission that Minato was to undertake tomorrow. Canopy Bridge. I thought with an odd sense of unease. For some reason I felt some form of trepidation when thinking about that mission of his, and could not for the life of me understand why. Regardless, as there was nothing I could really do, I simply sighed. I want this war to end. I couldn't help but think. Day after day, week after week, month after month, I had been doing missions, most of which could be classified as suicidal. There was absolutely nothing enjoyable about this way of life, and over the years, while I had enjoyed growing stronger, I really hadn't had any time to relax without worrying about anything. I picked up the book I was reading and hopped up to a nearby tree before sitting on the tree branch. Orochimaru's question a while back had got me thinking that having more knowledge about biology wouldn't be too bad. I only had enough knowledge of human anatomy and physiology to kill more effectively, but I had no deep knowledge about the body's more in-depth biomolecular processes. So here I was with an interesting biology book in hand written by none other than Orochimaru himself. While the information in the book was quite graphic, since he tended to explain how he got said information, I couldn't deny that it was very informative and interesting. I sat on the tree reading, taking my time to delve into the book. I could easily finish it in a matter of minutes, but then there would be no enjoyment. Eventually, I became lost in the information in the book, slowly reading and enjoying the new material I was learning. Suddenly, I felt a soft sensation on the back of my head causing me to blink. "Teacher." "Here," she said before handing me a scroll and hugging me closer. "What's wrong?" I asked, sensing a subtle turbulence in her emotions. She didn't reply, but I knew that something was bothering her, so I looked to the scroll in trepidation. I put my book down and opened the scroll before reading it. My body froze. I read through the mission statement twice more before tightly gripping the scroll, causing it to crumple. Gamer's mind was able to keep my mental state in check, but my body couldn't help but release some cold sweat from the information presented to me. Quest alert. Jinchuriki slaying. The Four-Tails Jinchuriki, Roshi of IWA, is on the move towards Kanabi Bridge in order to reinforce its defenses. Due to most of Konoha's forces being concentrated on destroying it, you and a squad of many other Umbu will be tasked with killing Roshi before he makes it to the bridge. If possible, you are to create a trail towards Kumo in order to frame them for the murder. Reward, 2,500,000 EXP, 100 stat points. Failure, death. I generated fire from my hands before burning the scroll to ashes. When are we to leave? Tonight. Kodo replied. IWA has become desperate to protect their supply chain, so we will need to stop him before he makes it to Kanabi Bridge. We'll rendezvous with many other groups at our eastern exit point. I watched as the ashes of the mission scroll flew in the wind before gripping my fists. Alright, I'll be there soon. Kodo stayed as she hugged me tighter once more before I felt the loss of her warmth. I closed my eyes in thought while looking up and relaxing my head against the tree. If Roshi was anywhere as powerful as Kushina, or even somewhat relative to Minato's strength, I would be in a lot of trouble. There was one technique in my entire arsenal that I believed would be able to kill him, but it would cause massive collateral damage and wasn't something I could use in a team effort. Not to mention, a skilled shinobi would be able to dodge it since it took a few milliseconds to charge up. Let me see my base stats. Ping. Name, Yorodon. Race, human. Age, 9 years old. Level, LVL 79. Next level, 304,000/321, 400. HP, 190696/190696 Regen, 4576.72 per min. CP, 269249/269249 Regen, 9154.47 per min. CC, 100%. STR, 368 plus, 258%, equals 949. VIT, 374 plus, 258%, equals 965. DEX, 372 plus, 258%, equals 960. INT, 246 plus, 298%, equals 733. WIS, 242 plus, 298%, equals 721. NG, 249 plus, 455%, equals 1135. Points, 115. Rio, 1,355,348. Ever since my main stats had reached 100 in value, I had not obtained another perk from them even though they had reached the 150 and 200 checkpoints. However, I had received perks for STR, VIT, DEX once they had reached the 250 base stat checkpoints. Dense Muscle 2, Passive, LVL Max. Dense muscle is a skill given to those with overwhelming strength. The denseness of your muscle increases greatly, allowing you to suffer less damage from physical attacks. Increased durability equal to your STRX2 value. Thick Skin, Passive, LVL Max. Thick skin is your body's natural outer defenses that depends upon your maximum HP value. It increases your final durability equal to 1% of your HP value. DUR increased by 1% HP. Hawkeye's 2, Passive, LVL Max. Hawkeye's 2 is a skill granted to those with incredible natural vision. With this ability, every point the user has in Dexterity X2 is a meter-long increase to their natural vision range. It also allows the user to see in the dark. i.e., a DEX stat of 200, including bonuses, would increase your maximum vision range by 400 meters. Thick Skin was an interesting perk as it sort of deviated from what I had expected. However, there was nothing else of note. I hadn't invested my points as I had been saving them, but at this point I didn't really have much of a choice. With that line of thinking, I put a single point into ENGY to give it that nice round number of 250. Ping. For reaching 250 in ENGY, the perk, Energy Conductor, has been upgraded to Energy Conductor 2. Energy Conductor 2, Passive, LVL, Max. 50% increase to your energy regeneration. 50% increase to your energy capacity. 25% damage increase to energy-based attacks. My brows raised slightly before I shook my head. Even this wouldn't be enough, so I put enough points into my WIS and INT stats to get them up to 250. Ping. For reaching 250 in WIS, the perk, Perception, has been upgraded to Perception 2. For reaching 250 in INT, the perk, Accelerated Analysis, has been upgraded to Accelerated Analysis 2. With this, I only had 102 stat points remaining, which I equally distributed to my STR, VIT, DEX and ENGY stats, leaving me with no more stat points. If my strongest attack was to be effective, I needed as much chakra as I could get. Additionally, I would need my strength, health, and speed to survive. I looked through my stats once more before closing the screen. I carefully put the biology book in my inventory, and stood up before taking out my work clothes from the inventory and changing. After slipping on my umbu mask, I looked to the east before vanishing from my spot. The sound of a cane slamming the ground was heard reverberating throughout the room. Inside this hidden bunker were 30 well-trained umbu members, each of them high-level jonins to S rank in strength, with the captains at higher levels of S rank. Danzo looked at each of us with his lone eye before saying, "Tonight, you all will risk your lives to give our village a chance to win this war. Some of you won't make it back in one piece and some won't make it back at all, but know that your sacrifice will allow the village to continue in prosperity for generations to come. I'd honestly rather not though. Too bad I'd get in a lot of trouble if I tried to ditch this madness. Besides, my teacher was going on it as well, and I at the very least had to make sure she got out of it all right." As those thoughts passed through my mind, Danzo slammed his cane on the ground once more, causing all of us to stand to attention. "Now go and complete your mission with your pride as a leaf shinobi." With the last word said, we all vanished from our spots and made it outside the village borders before beginning our journey. Rashi, the four-tailed Jinchuriki. I thought as I continued to travel through the forest. The mission intelligence had told us that Rashi was at a specific spot in between the borders of Iwa and Kusagakure. I had heard that he had been doing small things in the war here and there for Iwa, but nothing substantial. So why now? From all the information I had in him, I found that Rashi apparently had left Iwa over a decade ago, and he had been on his own ever since. The Tsuchikage must have given him some sort of incentive to return to duty. I didn't know how powerful the average Jinchuriki was, but Rashi had been alive around 3 times longer than I had, so theirs was no way he was a weak Jinchuriki. Keep your eyes forward and don't lose focus, Kodo said from beside me. I nodded my head and continued onwards at the breakneck speeds we were traveling at. In little time, we stopped in front of the entrance to a large forest with stony soil. We're near Iwa's border, I thought. Everyone stop, one of the Umbu captains said from in front. We are still some ways to our destination, but we need to begin making escape routes from here. It was at this point that Bor, one of the leading Umbu captains for this mission, spoke up to all the Umbu. The plan we have is simple. We'll set up multiple traps along here all the way to Kumo's borders. The worst-case scenario is that we all die, and they end up killing some IWA ninja along the way. The best-case scenario is that we are able to complete our mission, while also successfully drawing Iwagakure's attention to Kumogakure. At this point, one of the other leading Umbu captains for this mission spoke up. The enemy should have no idea that we have information on them since it was gathered by Jiraiya of the Sanin's intelligence network. The goal is to make it seem as if Kumo is behind the attack, so make sure to primarily use lightning release. Everything else I would have to say has already been explained in the mission details, so move out. All the Umbu replied in affirmation and spread out to begin laying traps and formations. We were working in teams in order to ensure that we didn't screw each other over and accidentally set off our own traps. It wasn't until a couple hours into the night that we regrouped together and began to plan our attack and escape routes. Dove. Bor stated while looking at my teacher. Can you sense anything? My teacher paused for a moment before shaking her head in the negative. No. Nothing is on my radar. Bor nodded before looking at the other team captain of this group of 30, a man with a lion-like Umbu mask. Should we continue? Lion nodded before looking ahead towards the rest of the Umbu platoon. We'll be heading into enemy territory very soon, and our sensor will alert us when we get close to our target. Regardless, stay on alert. We all nodded silently before the 3 team captains moved on ahead, the rest of us following them right after. Kodo moved on ahead as she had the greatest detection range, and I followed right behind her just in case she missed something. In but a few moments, however, Kodo perked up and gave us a hand signal. 20 kilometers away, 1.5 minutes, remain silent. There was no need for us to respond as we moved in unison towards our destination. However, as we reached approximately 5 kilometers from our target, I sensed a gigantic chakra signature. It was bright and scalding, dwarfing the small number of chakra signatures around it by a large margin. It was by no means greater than Kushina's chakra signature, but it was frightening nonetheless. I looked towards my teacher, whose gaze was focused ahead before she gave out hand signals as we approached our destination. 5, 4, 3, 2. A clearing came into view, around which there were multiple Earth-style huts set up. With my energy resonance, my gaze quickly focused upon a large tent that was in the center of the camp, and in that moment, Kodo gave out her final signal. 1. I immediately stopped, my movements and breathing suppressed to their absolute minimum. I looked down below while standing in the trees located around the edge of the clearing. My attention was astute as I awaited orders from the team leaders who were carefully watching the camp proceeding. Around the campsite there were multiple enemy guards keeping watch of the surroundings on each end of the clearing. Lion looked towards Kodo before signaling her, "How many?" Kodo paused for a moment before signaling back 101. We all waited here, watching and memorizing the patrol routes, timing, and activities of the guards in order to locate the most optimal form of attack. He gave a few hand signals, causing a couple of our Umbu to silently make their way forward just as 2 of the shinobi on standby had turned their heads for just a moment. It happened in an instant. Our Umbu covered their mouths and slit their throats, causing them to gurgle on their blood before eventually dropping dead. They immediately moved into the tent nearby, so I began focusing on my chakra detection in order to properly sense them. It was only a couple seconds later that I sensed the life energy of the enemy ninja in the tent being snuffed out before the two Umbu exited the tent. Lion nodded and quickly passed down a couple of signals. Boar, Panther, take a 1/3 of the platoon and split up. Dispatch the guards. Pay attention to the center tent. Move out. I followed Boar as he quickly led my teacher and the rest of our group to the other side of the tent. We stopped once we arrived at our position and waited till the guards began to change their pattern. Boar gave us a couple signals: squirrel, dove, attack when an opening arrives. Dove, I'll need your sensing abilities up ahead. I slightly nodded, watching as Boar, Wolf and the rest of our usual crew moved on. I then returned my gaze to the processes in front of me while noting Kodo doing the same. I carefully watched the movements of the guards and slowed down the rhythm of my breathing, waiting till the moment was just right. Then I struck. In the instant that the guards were distracted, I burst forward towards them with my kunai in hand. I landed on the shoulders of one of the shinobi, my knife in a reverse grip, and immediately clamped his mouth shut. The air whistled at the speed in which I brought down my chakra-enhanced weapon, its blade aimed at his jugular. The weapon easily connected, quickly sinking into the enemy's neck as if it were dough, causing blood to spray everywhere. My movements had been so quick and decisive that the enemy had not a moment to respond, and could only widen his eyes as he struggled and gurgled on his own blood. It was no surprise when his mortality eventually won out and his body slumped and fell to the ground. I quietly hopped off him and carefully placed his body down before looking to my left, noting my teacher was wiping the blood off her blade, the severed head of the other IWA ninja on the ground. I quickly manipulated the earth, sending my chakra through the soil and sinking the bodies of the enemies deep within. With a little water manipulation, I cleaned up the blood in the area and looked towards my teacher, who looked back at me with a nod before tilting her head towards the tent. I nodded and concentrated on the chakra signals inside, noting that the chakras of the individuals inside the tent were mild and undisturbed, indicating that they were in a relaxed position. I nodded to Kodo and quietly made my way inside, my stealth greatly aiding the masking of the sounds from my movements. I stood over the body of one of the sleeping IWA ninja before swiping my kunai across his neck quickly, killing him. I looked to my left to see that teacher had already completed with her end of the job and nodded towards her before moving to step out of the tent. Immediately I paused, Kodo stopping as well. Their routes finally changed. I thought as I sensed a couple of enemy signatures making their way towards this direction. I stayed quiet as the chakra signatures of the other enemy guards made their way over to this area and began to converse with each other. Hey, it's been pretty quiet as of late, don't you think? You know what, you're right. I suppose a lot of people decided to crash early. After all, with the four tails here there's very little to worry about. Still though. Ma, stop worrying so much, you'll get to see your pretty little wife soon enough. What? She's not Dash. Who are you kidding? You two have been practically inseparable for years. I'm actually surprised you two haven't actually sealed the deal yet. I was planning on proposing after this last mission. After all, I had promised her I would make it back. Haha, isn't that romantic? Took you long in Dash. The rest of the words rang silent through my ears as I sighed and quickly shook my head from any distracting thoughts. Gamer's mind calmed me down and allowed me to focus on the approaching chakra signatures before I pinpointed exactly where their bodies were in relation to me. I quickly charged and concentrated a large amount chakra to the tips of my index fingers. As they began to glow up and charge with plasma, I concurrently condensed the energy to be as thick as my finger before aiming and firing. Storm style, laser finger. Two thin beams of concentrated plasma escaped my fingertips and tore holes through the earthen-made tent before I heard the squelching sounds of my attack piercing flesh. Sensing their chakra signatures disappear, I sighed once more. Kodo came up from behind me and caressed my head gently before motioning me to move out of the tent. There in front of us, I saw the two corpses of the IWA ninja, each with a hole through their head, the heat from my storm release having cauterized the finger-thick wound instantaneously as they died. With that, I focused my energy resonance, and sensed the chakra signatures of my group further up ahead near the center of the camp. 35 left. I looked up towards teacher, who stared at me in return and rubbed my head once more before moving ahead. I followed behind her as we advanced carefully towards the center tent while making sure to avoid enemy detection. I could sense that the other Umbu were less frequently engaging the enemy, as we did still need some alive in order to lead them towards Kumo. Though any moment now they'll figure something is wrong. Enemy attack. That wasn't me. I definitely did not jinx that. Thinking along those lines, I looked to teacher, who immediately jumped up to the roof of the nearest earth tent, so I followed her. I looked around, noting the frantic movements of the enemy shinobi, while also sensing the chakra of the other Umbu gathering around the center tent. And then I froze. A scalding feeling of immense dread washed over my being like the scorching flames of the sun. My head whipped towards the source, sweat dripping from my brow as I felt a large buildup of chakra from the center tent. Something's coming. And then I saw it. A torrent of lava billowed out from the center tent, its height eclipsing the highest trees. The molten flames rained down upon the Umbu surrounding the small structure, its goal of annihilation made exquisitely clear. I watched as the Umbu quickly gave it a wide berth and watched on in silence, and the pillar of lava began to subside. Suddenly, I tilted my head and caught the kunai that had been aimed at my skull before charging the metal projectile with lightning. I threw it back towards the owner at hypersonic speeds with a flick of my wrist. Arg. And turned back towards Koto, who spared my motions a glance before commenting. The target has appeared. It appears so, I said as the magma pillar died down, giving view to the man within. Name, Rashi. Race, human. Level, LVL 135. HP, 675000/675000. CP, 670000/675000. STR, 2000. VIT, 2500. Dex, 1750. Int, 1500. WIS, 1500. NG, 2500. My lord. You don't have to come with me over there. She began. Once we put up the 4 violet flames formation around him, the battle will have already been ours. In the meantime, you can stay out here and assist with cleaning up the rest of them. I shook my head. I'll be able to take care of myself in there with you. And I don't want you to die. My teacher looked at me in the eye before shaking her head. I would argue with you, but we are short of time. Just promise me you'll keep your distance from him. I'll try. While I could sense she wasn't comforted by that, she decided to quickly move towards the focal point of the battlefield. I made sure not to lag behind as I followed her, while also making a quick mental note of the current situation. Some of the remaining enemy shinobi were being picked off by our forces as we didn't want the enemy to distract us while we were fighting the Four Tails. Besides, we only needed to lead a few enemies towards Kumo and any remaining stone ninja would call up reinforcements. Though, that all depends on if we can make it out of here alive. I landed next to Koto as we joined the encirclement. Each member of the unit surrounding Rashi stood poised to strike, their bodies slightly crouched as their weapons lay in grasp. I could hear the rapid beating of their hearts, sense their unease, smell the perspiration from their skin as Rashi stood tall with his arms crossed, his gaze shifting through the surrounding units. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. And opened them. Move. I heard Lion shout before Rashi spewed countless molten rocks from his mouth. I quickly separated from Koto as I moved to dodge and wadded through the scorching projectiles. The mere heat emanating from the attack caused my skin to swelter, but I focused on the matter at hand. In a coordinated fashion, 4 Umbu spread out from the encirclement and stood in a square formation before erecting a purple barrier of flames, and with that complete, we didn't hold back. 8 Umbu spewed water from their mouths, following which 8 more discharged lightning techniques into the torrential water wave. The lightning techniques augmented the collaborative chakra-based water wave as it hurled towards Rashi, its destructive capacity made evident as the ground tore in its path. Rashi sharpened his gaze before flipping through hand seals, raising his leg and trampling the ground. A 4-cornered barrier of lava appeared around him to shield against the incoming attack before an explosion rocketed our 4 violet flames formation as the techniques made contact. The dust and debris obscuring our vision quickly subsided as Rashi punched the ground, his arm glowing red with sweltering heat, causing pillars of lava to spew out from the earth near him. The geysers of lava then began to rapidly propagate and quickly spread outwards towards us. I stepped forward along with 9 others and placed my hands on the ground, causing a ripple to spread out and manipulating the earth underneath us. We shifted the direction of the lava beneath us and maneuvered the direction of its flow away from us, causing the magma to violently erupt from outside the 4 violet flames formation. In a fluid motion, lightning and water techniques flew over our heads and headed towards Rashi. They were perfectly timed just at the moment Rashi had finished executing his jutsu, leaving him little time to recover himself. He gritted his teeth and took the attacks with his body, causing him to be pushed back towards the barrier. He sunk his feet to the ground using lava, and slowed his body's motions before grinding himself to a stop. There was a moment of pause as Rashi narrowed his eyes. My heart seemed to still as a terrible premonition made its way through me. Before I felt it, an immense wave of heat washed over the battlefield as Rashi's chakra spiked immensely. A single tail appeared behind him before his body was enveloped by a chakra cloak of lava. The ground beneath him began to melt from his energy emission, and the vegetation in the surroundings began to smolder in his presence. Name, Rashi. Race, human. Level, LVL 150. HP, 6276806750000. CP, 660000/675000. STR, 2000, 50%, equals 3000. VIT, 2500. DEX, 1750, 50%, equals 2625. INT, 1500. WIS, 1500. NG, 2500. With that he lifted his head and vanished. A scream echoed through the barrier. My eyes widened as I turned to my right, seeing in my vision Rashi's glowing fist rammed through the chest of one of the Umbu members. The heat emanating from Rashi burned through the now dead Umbu's body, before he unceremoniously dislodged his hand, causing the body to fall and crumble as it came in contact with the ground. Immediately, I and every Umbu in Rashi's immediate vicinity leaped back in order to create distance, and in the same moment, we attacked. Hand seals formed. Chakra molded. Torrents of water and lightning techniques flew towards Rashi, who narrowed his eyes and did his best to move through the techniques. His area of motion was limited by the barrier we had set up, so he was forced to take a portion of the attack head-on. Steam obscured the visions of everyone on the battlefield, yet the sounds of clashing and destruction continued to sound out around us. I sharpened my eyes. Deconstructive analysis. With my sensing capabilities, I could sense Rashi's movements and position within the fog. Small red spots appeared on his body in my vision, each one denoting his weak points. I waited for an opening, calmly watching as he fought against out units, and began to compile damage throughout. We were losing men, however. Rashi was also losing steam, so all I needed to do was wait till he was most vulnerable. Shit, I thought, eyes widening as I felt Rashi dash towards where my teacher and 2 other shinobi were located in the barrier. The first individual barely lasted a few attacks before he was smashed away. Wind release. As I concentrated a large amount of energy in my lungs, the second individual along with my teacher worked in tandem to retreat and chip away at his stamina. Both my teacher and the other shinobi spewed torrents of water at Roshi and immediately dashed to opposite sides of him and contained him within a pincer attack. Roshi cocked his arm back and punched out, the shockwave and heat from his attack dispersing the combined techniques. However, he was soon wrapped by chakra wire on both sides as he had left an opening when dispersing the attacks. Both my teacher and the other shinobi followed through by generating a powerful electrical current that traveled through the wires and into Roshi. He grunted in pain before he released more chakra from his core, the heat from his lava armor melting the highly durable wire and traveling back towards their owners. They both faltered in pain for a brief moment, which Roshi capitalized on and jumped up, his chest bulging before he sprayed out torrents of lava at them both, intent on melting them to ash. The battle between Roshi and my teacher with the other shinobi had barely lasted a couple milliseconds from the moment the water techniques had been released to the moment Roshi had shot out his lava. Great breakthrough! Just before the lava fell on my teacher, I released the stored-up energy in a hurricane of wind that blew not only the lava away, but also Roshi. The wind tore through the earth as it passed by and hurled the Jinchuriki across the battlefield as he bounced across the dirt. At the same instant, the residual steam in the area completely dissipated with my attack, allowing our visibility to return in full. I noticed my teacher look my way. However, I didn't lose focus and immediately gathered energy between my hands before a large ball of plasma formed. My eyes picked up the weak points in his defenses, which is where I aimed as I released the gathered energy. Storm style, laser circus. Beams of plasma shot out from the sphere of energy in my hands and blasted Roshi in all the vulnerable areas I had found. In conjunction with my attack, the other members had not been idle, as they too attacked with their techniques as well, causing lightning and water to dance across the battlefield before impacting Roshi's body. The area trembled. Dust and debris obscured our sight from the collisions of energy. Minus 9,785. Minus 11,580. Minus 11,821. Minus 10,580. Minus 11,900. Minus 9,765. Minus 9,335. Minus 10,580. Minus 12,321. Minus 8,680. Minus 10,900. Minus 9,765. Minus 9,812. -9. Roshi. HP 306668/675000. Did we get him? One of our umbu asked out loud. I had the sudden urge to smack whoever said that. As I could see his damage bar, I was not surprised when Roshi emerged from the assault with ragged breaths. His chakra was in disarray, clothes and armor were torn apart, and blood was flowing through the wounds that seemed to be concentrated around his weak points. With a grimace on his visage, he looked at the small holes in his clothes and wounds on his skin caused by everyone's attack before his gaze locked with mine. An immense sense of deadly crisis overwhelmed me as Roshi's gaze seemed to literally burn through my body. It was only at the instant that Roshi was already upon me that accelerated analysis slowed my perception of time to a near crawl. I could see his slowly inching fist of lava and feel the scorching heat emanating from his body. There seemed to be nothing I could do. I couldn't fully dodge. I wasn't fast enough. Numerous possibilities appeared and disappeared in my mind. And then, an insane plan formed. Roshi's fist rammed through my chest like a hot knife through butter. I gripped onto his lava-coated arms, the immense heat emanating from them easily burning through my skin. Minus 153,703. Yoru. HP 49732/203435. Stage 1 of my incredibly suicidal plan, get stabbed through the fucking chest. Ow, this fucking hurts so damn much. How did I convince myself that this was a good idea? Roshi sent his lava coursing through my body intent on completely destroying me. I could see red crack-like lines spreading from my chest and moving across my body. However, I gripped onto his arm even tighter, ignoring the sizzling of my burning skin. My HP rapidly dropped, and it was only thanks to mystical healing that I was barely able to keep myself alive. Seeing as I had secured Roshi in place, the rest of the Umbu quickly moved into attack. At this moment, I could sense the myriad of emotions coming from my teacher. Shock. Confusion. Pain. She definitely wouldn't be happy with me later. ID create, empty. Thinking along those lines, a bubble of reality encompassed Roshi, and I as the bright white full moon turned red and sound seemingly disappeared. Roshi, immediately noticing the discrepancies, halted in the burning of my internal organs as he quickly looked around. The hell did you bring me? With fury evident in his visage, his arm, still painfully lodged in my chest, emitted a more fearful heat that threatened to completely destroy me within. I could only heal myself so fast with mystical healing, and in time his abilities would overwhelm my healing factor, so I moved on to stage 3 of my incredibly suicidal plan. Rows of inscriptions began to appear on Roshi's arm where my hands were connected. The man's eyes widened as they spread throughout his body, before each inch of his body and clothes were packed with my inscriptions. What? He said as he struggled to move. Kinetic absorption seal. I thought, however, Roshi had considerably more chakra than I did, and would be able to overload my seal with his energy, so it would only take a couple seconds before he broke out. But that was more than enough. And for the fourth and final stage of my incredibly suicidal plan, I clapped my hands together. We die. I sent every scrap of chakra into the palms of my hands as I separated them, causing a ball of lightning to form before it rapidly became bigger. And bigger. And bigger. In a few thousandths of a second, a dense ball of electricity, 25 meters in diameter, formed above me, containing every scrap of chakra that I could possibly muster. Then, I immediately condensed the energy into as small of a ball as I could and brought the now head-sized sphere of energy between Roshi and me. Roshi's eyes widened, and for the first time I could sense a feeling of trepidation coming from him. He struggled to move quickly, no doubt to dodge or run away. But it was too late. Lightning release, lightning bomb. I relinquished control over the immense amount of energy contained within the ball. And with that, my vision was overcome with white. Minus 325,000. Roshi. HP, 0/637500. Minus 262,500. Yoru. HP, 0/203435. You died. Activated, second wind. Plus 10% HP. Yoru. HP, 20343/203435. My eyes snapped open, which I instantly regretted as sand got in them. Fuck me, I thought before closing my eyes and trying to stand. It was only then that I realized that a good chunk of my body was still missing. Like my left arm. And a couple of my legs. I had only recovered 10% of my max HP after all, and my chakra was non-existent, so I waited for a single minute before I activated mystical healing. In about a minute or so later, I was able to feel my limbs again. My body still felt like shit as I stood up and sand cascaded down my body. I spit some out of my mouth before I blinked. Good thing I brought him into the ID. The area over a kilometer around me was a wasteland. Trees were destroyed, rocks were pulverized, and I was inside a giant crater. I looked around me and quickly found Roshi's mutilated body, and while he wasn't as bad in shape as I had been, that wasn't really saying much. The most frightening part of this entire thing was that even though my attack had taken every single bit of chakra I could have mustered in addition to my passive bonuses to lightning-based and energy-based attacks, I still would not have been able to kill him in one hit if he was at full capacity. It was only thanks to the fact that he had been injured and therefore slightly weakened that his attack didn't kill me instantaneously, and I managed to trap and bring him here with me. My lightning bomb technique should have had a raw damage value of over 500,000 HP with the passive bonuses. However, Roshi's durability was immense enough to shave off a great deal of that damage. Additionally, based on his stats and level, he was a tier 7A, which reduced the damage from my attack by a factor of 1.26. The only reason I took the small amount of damage that I did was because it was my chakra and the technique in the first place, so it naturally caused much less damage to me. I still died though. Thankfully, I had remembered that perk I had gotten all those years ago after I had absorbed the giant Komodo dragon's chakra core. If not, I would never have considered this suicidal plan. I sighed and focused on the matter in front of me. Since I needed proof of capture, I pulled out a kunai and lopped off his head before storing it in a scroll. I looked around once more before looking down at my chest, which was fully healed as no scars remained. Gamer's body. I figured that was how it worked, but still. Any normal individual would have died instantaneously if they had a lava-coated arm rammed straight through their chest, but it seemed like really did have the body of a game character. Damage was only calculated by how much energy was contained in the attack, and not where the attack hit me. I shook my head and prepared to leave before I paused and thought. I was at the bottom of a crater inside an ID, so considering that I appeared in the same place outside the ID that I was inside one, would I appear underground? I decided not to risk finding myself buried over 1,000 feet under and scaled the height of the crater in a single leap and at the plateau of my jump when I was above the crater. ID, escape. Kodo POV. No. I looked around to see if it was just me, and if I was in some kind of enemy genjutsu, or if everyone else had seen what I saw. However, seeing the genuine confusion in the rest of the squad's actions, I figured that it wasn't just me. But that can't be. He couldn't be dead. He had to be fine. My brain knew it was impossible for him to survive, but I couldn't accept that he had just left me. Just like that. I took deep breaths to calm myself down. However, my body wouldn't stop trembling. My eyes were getting blurry. What exactly happened? Does anyone know where our target is? I heard Lion voice his confusion. It was a fair question, however there was only confusion among the rest of our shinobi as they simply looked around somewhat lost as to what to do. Fine then. Lion said before signaling to the 4 shinobi maintaining the 4 violet flames formation, causing them to dispel it. I can't even say if we have completed our objective or not without proof of completion, but we have overstayed our welcome. Any moment enemy reinforcements will arrive, so we might as well move now. I hurriedly looked around for any sign of Yoro. Where exactly did you go? He had simply vanished with the target, meaning that he must have done something, and that he may be all right. I could only comfort myself with these thoughts. Dove. A voice said behind me. I turned around to face Wolf, who looked at me searchingly before looking around the battlefield. What's wrong? Where's the kid? I shuddered. I don't know. She paused and took off her mask before hugging me. I don't know what is going on, but you need to relax. You're shaking. Boar. Lion shouted before continuing. We need to hurry and move before IWA returns with more than we can handle. Boar looked his way. Lion, what exactly happened? I'll explain along the way, but we really need to move. Immediately before he could complete that sentence, a small figure suddenly appeared in front of him before landing on the ground. Lion had been already halfway through attacking at what he no doubt assumed was an enemy before he paused. The hell? Squirrel? Squirrel blinked before turning around. Yes, Captain? The man narrowed his eyes before looking at Dove, who had been frozen in place. She suddenly moved, and in a blink of an eye, Squirrel was in her embrace. Convinced that he wasn't dealing with an imposter, Lion placed his weapon down. I would love to know what the hell just happened, but we need to move immediately. Boar nodded and looked at me and the rest of the crew before motioning with his head to follow. With everything settled, we quickly vanished from the area while making sure to leave deliberate, but believable, chakra trails for our enemies to follow. I looked towards Yoro and noticed his current state. His mask had been destroyed earlier, and his shirt/flak jacket was currently non-existent, which wasn't a surprise seeing as he had been stabbed through the chest with lava. By all means, he should not have been alive, but I knew his chakra signature like the back of my hand. There was no way I could think of that this was an imposter. I wanted to say a lot I wanted to say and do to him, however, this was neither the time nor place for me to do so, and that wasn't even mentioning the fact that I was emotionally drained and didn't have the energy to do anything to him right now. I always had this feeling that there were still a lot of things about him that I still didn't know. But I thought to myself before focusing ahead. As long as he's alright, it doesn't matter. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.